So last year we took a look at the early work of director, distributor, editor and all-round good egg J.R. Bookwalter. And while I had a bit of a mixed experience to say the least, I came away with the feeling that there was definitely way more good than bad on display. I was very much charmed by the SOV 6-pack, and after I finished editing the reviews, I really was left with the urge to find out what happened next. And so, I headed over to MakeFlix and nabbed up a copy of 1993's Ozone, a film that very much was a make-or-break moment for JR. You see, after Humanoids from Atlantis came out, JR was somewhat frayed. Initially, he'd assumed that the SOV 6-pack project was going to be predominantly horror-driven, but with each request for a new movie that came in, the films moved further and further away from the genre. That, combined with totally unreasonable budgets and an insane delivery deadline that came with them — seriously, this guy was averaging 5-week turnarounds from pitch to store — it resulted in JR being totally burnt out. And when the pitch came in for 2 more movies, a blaxploitation and a western, both budgeted at $1,250 each, and both with similar turnarounds to the last 2 movies in the project, JR understandably bailed. After taking some time to recalibrate, reflect and take stock, he decided to try one more roll of the dice to see whether filmmaking was his true calling. Only this time, it'd be on his terms. Budgeted reasonably, no hard deadlines, made almost as a way to absolve himself from the carnage that was the 6-pack. And so, Ozone was created. JR made amends with several people from the 6-pack project, including Matthew Jason Walsh and Scott P. Plummer, whilst also wrangling back the ever-amazing James Black for a leading role. But he needed a script, an idea, something fresh. And he found exactly what he was looking for at the hands of first-time scriptwriter David A. Wagner. According to JR, when he first saw the script for Ozone, he saw a complete picture in his mind. He knew exactly what he wanted to do with it, and he pursued Wagner to try and secure the script rights. Wagner sold it to JR, and to go one further, in order to get the film off the ground, Wagner and Bookwalter both agreed to stump up roughly $1,500 each in order to give the film the best possible chance of having legs. And, armed with a $3 to $3.5K budget, a solid cast and crew of old and new faces, and a burning determination to re-establish himself, I don't feel it'd be hyperbole to say this is probably one of the most solid SOV productions I've seen to date, and arguably one of the best films that JR has ever made. The film follows Eddie, a cop who's on stakeout with his best buddy Mike. They're hunting drug dealers, and Eddie has greased the palm of a guy called Squeaky to give them a tip-off on a deal that's going down in a park. But all is not as it seems, as Richter, the guy Squeaky is talking to, actually has a plan of his own, and has bribed Squeaky to get the cops to the park because he needs them. When the cops finally decide to jump Squeaky and Richter, a gunfight breaks out, and in the chaos, Eddie and Mike get separated and Squeaky and Richter get hit. When Eddie goes to check on Richter, at first he seems to be fairly non-responsive. But with a sudden jolt of life, Richter stabs Eddie in the wrist with a syringe filled with a mysterious substance. Mike, meanwhile, while trying to get away from the crossfire, ends up at an abandoned building and decides to investigate it to see if anything's going on in there. While inside, he finds a glass vial with the words Ozone written on it, and shortly after that he finds 3 people slowly starting to shuffle after him in the building. They start to attack him, and after a brief skirmish, Mike ends up trapped in a small room, gets his hand chopped off, and gets attacked by what can only be described as some kind of druggy zombie thingy. Anyway, some more time passes and Eddie hears nothing from Mike and is eventually told by the captain to head down to the station and write the incident up. And a short time after that, he's called into the captain's office and told that Mike still hasn't returned, which Eddie is partially on the line for, and that he's on thin ice for not doing things by the book. Eddie tells his captain he's going out to look for Mike, and after a strong exchange, the captain suspends Eddie with immediate effect. And that's when things start to get a little crazy. Eddie heads to the bathroom after the exchange to go and freshen up, and while he's in there, his wrist starts pouring with blood. This gets worse and worse, and in a bizarre sequence, his body morphs and bends, eventually peeling Eddie back to a skeleton. Eddie then wakes up in his house with no memory as to how he got there, but with one clean mission on his mind: to find Mike and figure out what's going on. And this starts Eddie on a strange and bizarre journey that will lead him through underground fight clubs, his partner's apartment, and put him face to face with a mutated half-mutant alien, half-human, formerly known as Sam. As Eddie's life continues to spiral out of control and the ozone he was injected with begins to wreak havoc on his body and perceptions of reality, will Eddie manage to get to the bottom of what's going on with ozone? Will the police catch up to Eddie before he's able to find out what happened to Mike? And is it so wrong to be a half-mutant alien, half-human hybrid anyway? I mean, these guys have a bit of a hive mind thing going on, and they can regenerate from stabs, gunshots and melee attacks pretty quickly. I mean, I'd see that as an absolute win. Anyway, all this and more will be answered if you check out Ozone. And the difference between what was produced in the six-pack era and this is frankly night and day. Across the board, it feels like new life has breathed into this production, and it's so much better for it. Script-wise, we have a punchy, experimental and interesting piece that blends the horror, sci-fi and action genres with just a hint of a thriller and a dash of art house experimentation to create something that, while not a million miles away from previous efforts, is very much a film that's standing on its own two distinct feet. Comparisons to Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the works of David Cronenberg are all but inevitable. The film does play quite heavily in places on the who's normal and who's a freaky alien plotline, and there's several examples of body horror throughout. Whether it was intentional or otherwise, I also picked up some tones of The Wicker Man in places, and a few tonal pangs of Extra as well. The big difference, however, between this and Bookwalter's other works is the amount of blatant references in this versus his older works. There's nowhere near as many references in this film. I spotted one blatant reference to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I personally think was actually quite tastefully done, and one, maybe two, that I'm not 100% confident in thinking are a reference to anything in particular. And I'm so happy that that side of things has been toned down, as while I don't mind a small reference or homage here and there, it has been a bugbear of mine with Bookwalter's work dating all the way back to The Dead Next Door. Dialogue is smooth and drips from the actors effortlessly, and most critically, it feels authentic. It's a very naturalistic sounding script, and while I don't think there's that many quotable lines in the film, I think if the dialogue is strong enough that I can't actively pick a flaw with it, it's got to be doing something right. So kudos to the team on that one. In fact, the only two criticisms I have about the script really are that there are a few instances where the film has clearly been padded out to hit that sweet 80-minute runtime. Usually this will involve making something simple like Eddie investigating a room run for much longer than it needs to, or it can just be having some dialogue scenes run for a bit longer than necessary in order to pinch an extra minute or two's worth of time here and there. Mercifully, this doesn't happen all that often, but there's almost no attempt to hide or play these down. They're quite blatant when they turn up. I realise this may be more of an editing criticism than a script-based one, but some of those unnecessary dialogue scenes, while nice, really do only hamper the film. And the only other thing I felt was a bit lacking was the ending itself. I won't go into details about what happens in the end because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's one of those movies that has an end that kind of comes from far left field, and if you think about it for too long, it doesn't really make all that much sense. It's not a bad ending by any stretch, it's perfectly serviceable. I just feel like there could have been a bit more of a meaningful or satisfying ending than the one we got. The script was written by David A. Wagner, with additional material provided by J.R. Bookwalter. This is Wagner's only writing credit, and it was his first time writing a feature. He seems to predominantly work in visual effects, with 10 credits to his name and a reasonable chunk of them being Full Moon feature productions. The film was directed by JR, and we've gone in depth with him way back in my Dead Next Door review. But as an interesting piece of trivia, as a cost-saving measure and a way to help further get rid of evidence of past transgressions, JR recycled the master tapes from Chickboxer and possibly Humanoids from Atlantis for Ozone. While this decision probably did benefit humanity in the short term, it did create two major problems down the line. Chiefly that both Chickboxer and Humanoids from Atlantis no longer had master tapes to go back to for restoration. A big problem for the recent SOV set. But also, because those master tapes had been used extensively for dubbing during the making of Chickboxer and Humanoids from Atlantis, it meant that portions of the tape were worn or damaged by the time Ozone got to filming. This means that portions of the master tape for Ozone have flicker, generational wear, strobing, and head desynchronization, resulting in a warping at the top and bottom of the frame, meaning that a lot more work had to go into this film's restoration, most of which could have been ultimately avoided. On the direction front, it's brilliant. A real and proper return to strong stylistic direction, as seen in the likes of Robot Ninja and Zombie Cop. Almost every scene in this film just oozes character. From the smoky and sinister back alleys through to the tightly focused and claustrophobic cage fight scenes, the whole film really is a lightning in a bottle moment. The point where a director was instantly enamoured by a script and could see perfectly how this thing was going to look right out of the gate, and he just makes it happen. It's a wonderful feeling when the planets align like that. But I feel like JR was onto a winner with this one and delivers an experience that is genuinely some of his best work to date. To that end, the cine is just next level. Not only do we get to see a decent upgrade on Bookwalter's previous penchant for coloured lighting gels, here being used absolutely optimally to deliver a film that looks incredibly distinct and has a very nice, moody, shadowy quality to it that reminded me of a somewhat softer Robot Ninja, but we also get to see some major technological leaps, including the introduction of a track and dolly kit to allow for some gorgeously smooth tracking and panning shots. And I really can't praise this enough. Those are used sparingly and with intention rather than being used to show off a bit of new kit. And I love that choice because it means when it is used, it's super effective. But that's not all. There's also a serious upgrade to the practical and video effects, with some frankly astoundingly good practical effects of boils, bubbling skin, and skeletons being married up to relatively new video effects for the time. This is the first JR film to utilise morphing, an effect that was still relatively new to the industry. So to see it crop up in an SOV movie out of Ohio when, at the time, even the big studios were struggling to make it work, well, that's next level. In the original 1993 release for this film, the morph effects were a little ropey. I mean, it's impressive that they could do it at all, but they weren't as good as they could have been. Fortunately, with the advance of modern technology, the 2020 remaster for this film utilises much smoother effects to help aid the morphs and warps used in this film, without encroaching on the integrity or authenticity of the original. Add into this Dutch angles, tracking Dutch angles, sweeps, and a suitcase of experimental but effective cine, aided by some top-tier editing, and the sequences are nothing short of marvellous. This is just a very well thought out, very well structured, and ultimately very well packaged production through and through. Performance-wise, we're golden. This is probably James Black's best performance as he plays an everyman character slowly being pulled into this surreal world. On the one hand, trying to piece together what's happened to his friend, whilst also trying to piece together what's happening to himself. He's charismatic, sharp, determined, and bold, and given some of the weirdness he has to deal with in this movie, he's everything a good lead should be, and he absolutely smashes it. Nothing short of excellent. Nathan Michael is also great as Sam, the head Ozone mutant, giving a more than memorable performance as a creature that, for low-budget 1993 SOV cinema, is really quite a sight. It was also nice to see longtime JR collaborator James L. Edwards back again, this time playing multiple roles, with his drug baron from the opening sequence easily being my favourite. He's not in this film as much as previous movies, but it was still super cool to see him crop up. The rest of the cast are all more than decent, and again, unlike previous films where cast members had to be drafted in at the last minute and they were often reading their scripts from cue cards just off camera, here it's all professional, and it's so good to not have any specific actors to rag on. Everything's just good to brilliant, nice and solid, and more than does the job. Finally, the soundtrack. And we have a mixed team on the front for this one, with Matthew Jason Walsh returning to the scene to do a few of the rockier numbers, but the majority of the score being given to Jen C. Moller, who'd previously composed music for Violent Shit 2. Quite honestly, I kind of miss the Six-Pack era scoring. This wasn't completely to my personal taste, but I can't fault it. we have a somewhat subdued, more than decent soundtrack that punctuates the film perfectly, and personal taste aside, it achieves what it sets out to do. So it's a big thumbs up from me. Ozone was released on VHS in June 1993 by Tempe Video. It then later received a 10th anniversary DVD release in January 2004 under Tempe DVD, before finally landing on Blu-ray in August 2020 from Makeflix. Much like other JR films, this feature has had a ground-up restoration to drastically improve and stabilise picture quality, smooth and update effects, improve the titles and credits, and from the ground up recreate the audio. And it looks amazing. This is easily hands down the nicest this film has ever looked. It's also packaged with extras, most of which have been ported over from the previous DVD version, including 2 audio commentaries, outtakes, a making of, a location tour, plus new features including a new audio commentary, a couple of new spots for the film, and test footage. The film's also available as a digital-only option through Makeflix, which I think is a really nice touch. Ozone marked a significant challenge for J.R. Bookwalter, an attempt to dig himself out of a series of bad habits that had grown as a result of necessity from the SOV six-pack days. This was a chance to redefine himself and help clear his record after a string of mixed to bad movies. And I can honestly say, if you've watched the SOV six-pack, Ozone is a palate cleanser you really need in your life. A superb feat of shot-on-video filmmaking, this film's got it all. A solid script, superb direction and cine, stellar casting, a more than decent soundtrack, all tied up in a stylish and thoughtful package that is more than worth the admission fee. I can recommend this not only as a prime example of good SOV filmmaking, but as a great movie in general. If you aren't watching Ozone this week, you're missing out.